ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening. Thank you for downloading. And thank you for subscribing to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I am your boy, 12 Kyle. Man, check this out. April 19th, 1994. On that day, the rapper Nas would release his debut album, Illmatic. And at the time of this recording, the album is turning 30 years old. If you follow me and you've been following the podcast, you know that I did do an album review on the 25-year anniversary of Illmatic. But I wanted to do something different here on this one. I didn't want to come on and just, do another album review because I've already done one. But I just wanted to give you my thoughts on this album. One, it's amazing that it's been 30 years, right? It doesn't feel like 30 years. 1994, to me, feels like yesterday. At the time that this album came out, I was 21 years old. Nas was 20. And what's interesting is, even looking back on it now, I didn't know, we were so close in age. I'm literally 9 months older than Nas. And if you had told me that day or the subsequent days after I bought that album that I would be listening to, in essence, one of my peers, I'd have told you it was crazy. Because he didn't sound like somebody who was 20 years old. Because at that particular time, Nas and I were in two different parts of our life. I was a student, a football player at South Carolina State University. I was in my junior year, I think. And Nas was a high school dropout. But we had a lot of similarities, in my opinion. We had a lot of similarities that I would come to fall in love with this album and come to get to know Nas through this album and in subsequent interviews and so forth and so on. But yeah, I think we had some similar issues or similar things. One of the things, like I said, our age difference, I did not know, because here's the thing: 1994, there was no internet, so I had no idea of knowing how old he actually was or wasn't. But once I found that out, I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. We're the same age. One of the things I think about this album, amongst many things, is that at that particular time, Nas had a point to prove. He was coming off the success of guest features on Back to the Grill Again, and of course, Main Source Live at the Barbecue, where he famously said on that album, on that particular track, when I was 12, I went to hell for snuffing Jesus. Which that line caught me, and I was like, man, I don't know who this guy is, but I gotta hear him. But I think he had a point to prove with this album. And I think, or at least I know now, at that particular time of my life, I had a point to prove as well. Struggling, college student, trying to find my way, trying to figure things out, just gotten out of a relationship, or a couple of relationships actually, and not really sure what was next. Trying to graduate, trying to play football, trying to get on the field and be successful. Driven by that, blocking out naysayers. I'm sure Nas had a whole bunch of naysayers. I mean, people call them haters now, but people who didn't think he could get it done. Same for me. I heard the naysayers. Oh, you're not going to do this. You're not going to graduate. You're not going to play. And, that type of stuff, you can either let it consume you or you can let it be fuel to your fire. Both Nas and I chose the latter. And then this album also represents struggle and hunger. He was struggling on this album. He was struggling in life. He was in the projects. He was in Queensbridge projects, which, I think at the time probably was the biggest housing project in America. And my struggle was a little different, but I was still struggling. I was, like I said, trying to find things, trying to figure out things, trying to figure out what was going to be next, even once I graduated. Because I had this silly thought that I was going to graduate and then be rich, and it didn't work out like that. I mean, none of that stuff works like that. It never does. But what can you tell a 21-year-old kid, right? So Nas and I had similarities, but this album was a gift that he gave the world. And I think, I think probably now he's understanding what this album means to us as fans. Now, let me be honest and pull the curtain back here if I haven't said it already. I can't remember if I did or I didn't. When it comes to this album, I am extremely biased, right? I don't hide my bias. I'll tell you up front, I'm extremely biased when it comes to this album. Personally, I think this is one of the greatest hip hop albums to have ever been made. Where you rank it doesn't matter to me. It's not my job to convince you of how great this album is. At the time the album came out, the critics said what they said, and they said where they thought it should be, and it got the vaunted 5 mics, and it was deemed a classic. I don't know what else you want me to tell you. It's not my job to convince you otherwise. I know what this album means to me and where I was in my life and its importance even to me to this day, because this is an album that I never stopped listening to. And probably as of at least maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I used to listen to this album every single Friday without fail. And I mean, I still listen to it at least 3 or 4 times a month, which is more than I can say for most albums. But every time I listen, I hear something different. And I think that's the definition of great music. You're going to hear something different. And it also transports me back to 1994, which for me was an incredible year for me personally. And this album reflects that. I could go on and on and on about how dope the verses are. I mean, he doesn't disappoint at all. This album is flawless to me from start to finish. When I finished listening to this album, the only bad thing I could say was, oh, this album's too short. That was it. I mean, the album is 39 minutes long. And the Genesis, which is the first track, is a skit. So you only really got 9 tracks. The album starts off with New York State of Mind. Track 3, Life's a Bitch, featuring AZ. Track 4, The World Is Yours. Track 5, Halftime. Track 6, Memory Lane, Sitting in the Park. Track 7, One Love. Track 8, One Time for Your Mind. Track 9, Represent. And the final track, It Ain't Hard to Tell. And it was produced by the likes of DJ Premier, LES, Pete Rock, Large Professor, Q-Tip. I mean, he had some heavy hitters, producing. And again, I mentioned he got the much heralded but rarely received 5 mics in the Source. And that's saying a lot because everybody couldn't get 5 mics. You really and truly had to have something that they deemed to be a classic for you to get 5 mics. And Nas got 5 mics for Illmatic. But this album still resonates. It still feels good. It still brings that warm feeling about. I had a very very special moment happen a few years ago. So like 2 years ago. I was at the New York State of Mind tour. And that was Nas, Wu-Tang, and Busta Rhymes. And I went to the concert with my oldest son, Deion. And I think Deion was 21 at the time. So Deion I'm there with our oldest son, Deion, and he's the same age that I was when I bought this album. And what was interesting was when Deion was in middle school, I had Illmatic CD. And I remember I went to go get in the car and I went to, listen to Illmatic, and the CD was gone. And then I went in his room, I was looking for something, and I saw the CD sitting on top of his CD case. And I started to say something. I was like, wait a minute. He took my CD out of the CD thing. I was like, let him listen to it. So he had that. He had Wu-Tang. He had a couple other of my CDs. And he grew to fall in love with that music and Nas. And so we're here at this concert, and I'll never forget it. It was one of the coolest moments I've had as a father. Nas is performing The World Is Yours. And I look out of the corner of my eye, and Deion is standing next to me. And he's rapping every single word, just as I was at 21 years old in my dorm room. And then I kind of turned to him, and we're rapping The World Is Yours to each other. It took everything in me not to shed a tear at that time. Cool, proud father moment. But that's where this album is with me. Again, it's not my job to try to convince you of how great it is. I am happy to say that this album, I think, is just as dope as it was in 1994 and 2024. And I think a lot of Nas as an MC and as a man. And I've never met Nas before. That concert is probably as close as I'm ever going to get to Nas. But I feel like I know him through the music, and I know him through this particular album. And I could see the similarities and feel and hear, how he felt. The struggle, the hunger, the drive to prove people, the drive to prove stuff to yourself, to find a way, to make a way for yourself. All of those things come into my thoughts when I hear this album. And more than anything else, it's still a cold ass album. It's still a cold ass album from Represent to Halftime. It bangs. There's not any track that I'm going to skip on this album. You have your few people that like this one better than they like that one. But I mean, from New York State of Mind to It Ain't Hard to Tell, I mean, I'm with it. In conclusion, I think one of the things that will always be with this album is where you were. And I know where I was, and I know where I was going. And I think Nas did a good job of really telling a story and taking us along for the ride. He paints such a vivid picture of who he was trying to be. And he's such a great storyteller that he was able to take me from my dorm room in South Carolina State University, or in my car, to Queensbridge. I'd never been to Queensbridge. I've never been to Queensbridge before. For all I know, I could have driven past Queensbridge. I wouldn't have known it. Of course, I knew what Queensbridge was and where it was, but I'd never been there before. But he took me there. And I think that's one of the beauties about this album, is that it's a timepiece. It's not dated. It's not old. It doesn't make you feel old. I feel like that 21-year-old. So when I think back 30 years later, I'm 51 now. But this album still makes me feel like I'm 21. Makes me feel strong. It makes me feel invincible. And I think that's what Nas felt when he stepped in the booth to write these rhymes. And at the end of the day, you can't be mad at that. And I think that's part of what is the true telling of a great body of work. Being able to stand the test of time. Being able to invoke emotions. Being able to be passed on from generation to generation. If you can do that, then you just might have a classic. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for me. Thank you for checking out this edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. special edition, bonus edition, because that's what this is. Because this is being released on the 30th birthday of Illmatic. To Nas, if you're watching, thank you. Salute, brother. I appreciate you. I appreciate this album. Continued success. As a fan, I will continue to support. For those of you listening, again, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. For those who watch on YouTube, you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, share it with your friends. Remember, this podcast drops every Thursday at midnight. From time to time, we drop bonus episodes on Sundays at midnight. You can find the podcast on any podcast reader. Wherever you get your podcasts, that's where you can find us. If you're on social media, hit us up on social media and follow me and the podcast on Twitter X, Instagram, Facebook, Threads, and TikTok. We have our own TikTok page for the podcast. It's at 12 Kyle and at 12 Kyle podcast. And if you feel so inclined, hit us up. You want to contribute to the show financially, $TWELVEKYLE. And if you're looking to get some merch, we now have 12 Kyle podcast t-shirts, hoodies, mugs, posters. Get you one. The link is in the description box. Again, that's going to do it for me. I am your boy 12 Kyle. I'll catch you guys next time. 5 G's. Cheers.